I suppose we could try to learn something, huh? Everybody's got a sheet. I got a question for you to keep in mind that we're not going to answer until the end, okay? At least towards the end. $64,000 question as we're talking about the topic of Santa Claus here. Is it ever okay to lie to your kids? Okay? I just want you to keep that in mind as we go on. Let's see. I'm going to pull us up on our Santa Claus notes. I'm going to take us to that section there where it says, how do we best accomplish it? We had done a little bit talking about what are we trying to accomplish, and maybe to just review about that again is anything with our Christmas celebrations. Again, wanting to make sure that we try to maintain the Christ emphasis as best that we can. How do we best accomplish it? Looking on your sheet there, it says, evaluate each argument in favor of and against allowing children to believe in Santa Claus. Which one presents the stronger case in each instance? We got the first one here. We have Santa, that Santa is equivalent to Satan. And they'll say, isn't it coincidence? Or is it merely coincidence that you have the same letters in the name? Or you have Santa as saint, and actually that's what that word means, going back to St. Nicholas. Focus on Santa adds to the joy of Christmas and makes it more special for children. Focus on Santa takes the focus off of Jesus at Christmas, or focus on Santa adds to the joy of Christmas and makes it more special for children. Maybe talked about this a little bit more, but it doesn't hurt to review it again. Do you see issues on both sides? One of the things that I always encourage with something like this, and this is one that I know I've seen fellow Christians get really worked up about, and it's one that I've seen both sides, and I see sometimes more people getting concerned as our society is becoming more secular, and it's becoming more secular than we realize. When we finished up last time, I had talked about too. I was surprised in the Midwestern rural United States how many young children don't know who Santa Claus is now, or don't know who Jesus is. They know who Santa Claus is, but don't know who Jesus is. And again, these are the unchurched. It shouldn't surprise me, but it did, where I had 7, 8, 9-year-old kids who the first time they heard about Jesus, it was from us at church, and that he had anything to do about Christmas. Do we see that in Christian homes? Do we see practicing Christian parents and children? Do we see Christian children not knowing who their Savior is? No. Okay. So you kind of got some trick. Let's try to put some things on each part of the scale here. You ever hear this statement? And it's still around today, depending on when it is. Will depend on how much you hear. You'll hear it in different ways. One of the things is put the price back in Christmas. You ever hear that? And another one we get, and I get caught up in this. It irritates me when I walk into a store and somebody says to me in December, and it says Happy Holidays. Yes. Okay. I can understand where people are getting that they feel that they feel that the holiday is being blurred, or even there's an attempt to take it away from us. And with the happy holidays things, that could be and that's a whole different subject, and maybe even a whole different Bible class. But there is something that relates here. But I can see, what do you tell a parent that says, you know what, I really think that Santa Claus is too much of a diversion from what the real meaning of Christmas is. How do you speak to that? Let's go with that. Let's go with that, Terry Lee. Okay, it's their choice, and that's one of the things I think that we have to remember. Okay, and I think this is so important. I think it's always been important. We need to be careful, and they need to be aware of this too. We should be very careful about suggesting to other people how they are to raise their children. Okay? And no matter how deeply we feel on these things, and there are some people that feel that Santa Claus is just really anti-Christian. And I could see in some cases where it could become that. But let's remember some other things that we learned in confirmation class, right with the commandments when we deal with one another. Okay? First of all, I'm going to speak to one, and it comes with the 8th commandment. You should not give false testimony. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not lie or deceive, or that we do not deceive, or that we give false testimony or tell lies about our neighbor. And then taking their words and actions in the kindest possible way. I learned it putting the best construction on everything. So one of the things is that as we look at what other people are doing, the Bible commands us that our first reaction should be, let's try to take this in the kindest possible way. Let's put the best construction on this first, before we open our mouths. Maybe ask a few questions or whatever. But before we start preaching and telling somebody to do, let's try to take their words and actions in the kindest possible way. And then in relation with this, the Apostle Paul says in his letter to the Ephesians in the 3rd chapter, speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in love. I have seen all ends of the spectrum when it comes to Christmas celebrations and Santa Claus being involved. And I could show you an equal amount of positives and negatives. Okay? The circumstances aren't always the circumstances aren't always the same. But and that maybe explains too. And there are some instances where I would say, okay, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this. And then there are instances with other families and keeping the proper emphasis where, it's something, it can be a good aid to one's Christmas celebration and helping to keep our focus. And like I said, one of the things that's good to keep in mind is that actually our Santa Claus tradition finds its roots in something actually, that is true, St. Nicholas. And again, we talked about that last week. St. Nicholas was a pastor who made sure that families in his community got the things that they needed against the wishes of the government. And he didn't bring things down the chimney. He just snuck them in their windows. And again, keeping in mind the giving of gifts at Christmas, that's not what Christmas, because then again, think about this. Can you think of things that think of all the things that the devil can use with the celebration of Christmas that he could use against keeping the focus on Christ? What are some of those things? gifts, the meals, getting together with family, the parties and everything. Sometimes some of those things go to excess. Whether it's with alcohol or food or whatever, and depending upon how legalistic the Christian is, you can find fault with just about everything because Satan can take and twist, and our sinful natures can take and twist everything. It's a reminder for us again in everything, whether we eat or drink, whatever we do it all to the glory of God. We mess up, we sin in every aspect of life. That's not an excuse for us to not be concerned about those things. But I look at a lot with. Let's look at it for this. One of the big things during the Christmas season is getting together. Okay, it's people, and you know what? That is a wonderful thing. It's a blessing, and at the same time, it can be a curse too. We're getting together very often. That's when there's domestic disturbances. I love my family. We get together, and usually that's when old things can surface, and you can get into arguments and that. Other things, sometimes people they get so caught up into those things, and they make those things the most important thing of their celebration. So then when you have, and please don't take this in the wrong way, what are usually the hardest times for Christian people, and not even Christian people, but all people, during the time, we get to Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, even non-Christians celebrate those things and get together. What makes those times hard, sometimes the hardest, is when you lose a loved one, right? That's normal. But you get sometimes that, this is one thing in our society. Christmas is one of the biggest times for depression, for suicide, and illness and all of that. And a lot of it gets so caught up into, well, so and so is not there, or if people want to or sometimes if people don't have any place to go. And we get so caught up in all of the trimmings that go around it, we lose focus of why we're celebrating in the first place. And so, let's go on a little bit. I remember I told you that question, or asked you that question: is it ever okay to lie to your kids? Here we got number 2. On each side. One side says parents shouldn't lie to their children. The other side says parents lie to their children all the time when it serves a good purpose. Let's look at that. Let's look at that one. Why parents lie to their kids all the time when it serves a good purpose. Can you think of examples like when we do lie to our kids for a good purpose? Okay.
Why not? Because I said so. I'm kind of lying because I said so, because there really is a reason, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Although I will defend you on that one, Heidi. You know what? My dad always told me, because I'd say to Dad, why? And my dad says, I don't have to give you an explanation. You're just supposed to do what I tell you. Yep. And so I don't think that one. In my book, that one doesn't qualify. But
it's not a lie, but it kind of is. I mean, I really don't. Or when they can't explain myself, I always pulled all of them. You're my favorite. And then they realize they told them all that, and they're like, well, how can I tell one of you? You were my favorite.
Here's one that's my favorite. I found out later on, my parents used this one on me. The dog ran away.
Oh.
Yeah. I had a beagle. My first dog was a beagle. He ran away. Later on, my mom told. I was in my 30s before my mother told me what my And you know what? They told me that for their good, for my good. Um, maybe someone loses a job, and mom or dad loses a job, and they don't want their kids to know how tight things are, or you try to shelter your kids from those things. And I think those are some good examples. Okay. Can you think opponent with parents on the thing? Parents shouldn't lie to their children. Opponents of Santa take a hardline stance on any and all deception of children. And here's one of the things I tell you where I get concerned in this area is when you go too far in one direction. Okay? Anytime with any aspect of our Christian life, when we go too far in one direction, it's never good. Whether it's on the conservative side or whether it's on the non-conservative side. That really isn't, no good can ever come of that, really. And the reason I say that is one of my, if you ever looking for some good religious reading outside of your Bible, one of my former college teachers by the name of Daniel Deutschlander wrote a really good book that's called The Narrow Lutheran Middle. This is one of the things that I love so much about Lutheranism. And actually it's talking about Lutheranism and sound biblical teaching, where we picture our entire life of going down the road. Okay? Now, if you stay in the middle of the road, you're fine, but what happens when you start getting towards the shoulder of the ditch? Pretty soon, you're going to have a wreck. But if you stay in the middle, you're on some good, solid ground. And really, that is one of the things about good, solid Christian living and good, solid Christian teaching. It's avoiding the extremes. And while I respect a lot of things that come from our Reformed counterparts in Christianity, fellow Christians over at south of town here and so forth, and I appreciate them, and I know that there's going to be plenty of them that we see when the Lord returns and we get to heaven. I get nervous, very, very nervous, when you get over too far to one side, and they have a tendency to do that. It's all this or nothing. And not realizing, and I'm not talking about things where Scripture is crystal clear and speaks definitively for it. There's a lot of areas in our lives as Christian where the Bible doesn't speak necessarily to of Christian freedom. And where, depending how far we get to one side or the other, will depend, and maybe this isn't good. It's like the Apostle Paul says in his, it's in Corinthians, and he says, all things are permissible, but not everything is beneficial. In our life, where he reminds us in our lives as Christians, God gives us a lot of freedom. But then he tells us, while many things are permissible, he says, stop and think, and he says, is it beneficial? And sometimes when we're going through a lot of times we have a tendency to just go through the motions, and when we're going through the motions, then comes the question, is it beneficial? Is it, same, we've got a good pattern of worship in our service when we're going through the motions. Is it beneficial? And again, once again, I wandered out to the other side. Should parents, in this question, should parents ever lie to their children? Okay, Jesus tells us that Satan is a liar and the father of lies. Okay. at the same time, then you come to this dilemma that comes up. It's often come up in wartime. It came up in Germany while Christians, where Christians were sheltering the Jews from the Nazis. When the Nazis would come and say, "Are you harboring anybody?" and these people were lying to the government, then people say, "Well, isn't lying a sin?" There you have an instance where yes, lying is a sin, and then Scripture tells us this too. We have to obey God rather than men. With our kids, again, sometimes too, I'm looking with Santa Claus and so forth. With one of the things and I do think we have to worry about this. We talked a little bit about it last week. That kids are the millennials, which I'm trying to think they consider that generation to start in 1995, are big ones on integrity. They look at and it's something that we have to be concerned about. I'm doing this innocently with my child. I want them to have fun and enjoy. And we have to ask, I think we need to ask ourselves, how long am I going to do this? Or do I want to let my child know right away that this is just a game so that they don't start getting mixed signals? And then when it comes to religion going, well, they told me this was true and it's not. What about this stuff with the Bible and with Jesus? And I know that there are people today, Christians today, that are concerned about that. Again, where I see a lot of well-meaning Christians pointing at stuff like this and saying this is the reason that we have so many millennials that have nothing to do with the church today. Again, I think we need to stay in the narrow biblical middle, but yet at the same time, I think it's stuff for us to consider too. And here, you got to know your child too. You got to know your child. And I can tell you that moms and dads know their kids better than anybody else, And so, again, so you're not going to hear your pastors tell you this is what you should do. Going on. Number 3 kind of takes up the same thing. Telling your children that Santa is real blurs the line between fantasy and faith. The other side, encouraging belief in Santa fosters wonder and imagination and encourages belief in the supernatural. Once again, you can see positives on both sides there. And I think it comes down to, what are mom and dad? What is everybody? What is the purpose? What's the focus? There was something on here, and I'm sorry, there was, and I don't think I included this for you, but I'm going to ask you about something. I just was reading about something in my study in preparations for this. That I heard, and I wasn't familiar with this. But it was something, it's called Elf on the Shelf. Have you've heard about that? Tell me a little bit about that, Carrie Lee.
Well, I think it's a little elf or whatever, but I don't know exactly what you do either. I mean, but like it can come or whatever, and you never know quite what it's going to do, but it's kind of naughty or I mean, like it's in the flowers and this or does this. And I don't know. I think but it can be just so you never know quite where it's going to pop up or whatever. But I don't know what the whole background is behind it. I mean, Leslie was saying we didn't do it, and everybody I talked to was like, "Oh, I should never start this. One more stupid thing to do or whatever." But there's cute, like I've seen kind of like the elf duct taped to the wall, and the army guys at
it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, but like you say, I don't know what the thing is behind it, if you, what, and then the elf will leave a note or whatever too, but I don't know like what the whole. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is either, but I've seen it on Facebook, you know, people post something. Yeah, it's like, yeah, like on the, I don't know, I just like the architecture of it. Yeah.
What?
I don't, like you say, don't know the purpose, I don't know if it's, you know, Christmas is coming to be good, or I don't know, like, how does people do it?
It sounds like I mean, it takes, again, like you said, it takes some time. I just have this little note here that it says that Elf on the Shelf is an extension of the Santa story. The elf is a spy from the North Pole to help Santa with his naughty and nice designations. Rather than using it for its intended purpose, however, many use Elf on the Shelf to cause humorous mischief in the house during the Christmas season. For example, after the kids go to bed, Mom and Dad will take a box of cereal, tip it over on the kitchen counter so that some spills out, and then place the elf sitting on top of the box. When the children wake up the next morning, the impression is given that the elf caused the mess. A little internet searching reveals that parents can get pretty creative with this. In general, the discussion about Elf on the Shelf is more or less the same as it is with Santa Claus. To me, it sounds like it sounds like a fun game. I mean, in the course of my ministry, I've encountered so many fun families that have different ideas that do things that have holiday customs that I think are just a you know, maybe this one is a little bit different, but I think about a family in Minnesota where when they got together for Easter, they called it their peep competition, and they had a competition with everybody in the family every year to see who could launch their peep the farthest, or their peep whatever they, and it was funny how creative they got with that. I mean, they spent months, you know, but it was things that they were things fostered for fun. And I could see this Elf on the Shelf being the same thing, because, you know, at the same time with this Elf on the Shelf, what kid is going to think, well, this thing's real? It's a game and it's a thing for laughs and chuckles. I think the Lord's got a sense of humor.
And I know, yeah, I mean, I think like everything will do it differently, or you know, like leave a note or not leave a note, or just pop stuff from day or everything. Just a couple that I worked with.
Well, do you guys do anything for Christmas that is actually humorous? Any traditions that are for fun?
It was probably about for 15 years, that thing would circulate pop up at either a birthday or Christmas or something, you know, and somebody would have it, and then you kind of forget about it, maybe a couple years would die down, and then all of a sudden it would pop up, somebody would get it as a gift someplace or something. I don't know whatever happened to it, but it just finally disappeared. I don't know.
Yep.
Probably in somebody's basement or closet, they probably forgot all about it, but. Or maybe they threw it away or gave it to somebody out of the family who wasn't in it with us or something. But we have fun.
My mom and dad had during Christmas where I had to look for your big Christmas present. You know, there was always a big gift, and you'd have to find it. It was always hidden.
We always unwrapped it, like you have to guess before you could unwrap it, and so like my dad's mom and my uncle, it was he guessed it every year. It didn't matter what he guessed it. He would get so happy. And then one year she put a rock that was super green, something else there, and he guessed it that year too. So she was just like, I mean, he would just sit there and shake and bake until he figured out what it was. And we still guess, you know, or whatever.
We weren't quite that inventive, yeah, but we played bingo because the kids were learning their numbers, and the grandkids were learning. And then what they
cool.
and we sign their book. And they still have, they're growing, but they still want to be,
You know, I think with some of these things too, I've got some relatives out in Wisconsin, and I'm trying to remember what church body they belong to. It's not important, but again, kind of took this was one that always cracks me up. They belong to their pastor, and I mean even to this day, it's a sin to play cards. You cannot have a deck of cards in your house. But they have, that's a deck of playing cards, aces, kings, queens. But it's not a sin to play rook. Have you ever seen that card game? It's basically like your average deck of cards, but you don't have aces, kings. They're just all numbered and different colors. So they're playing the same games, but it's just a different deck of cards. But that's okay. One deck of cards is sinful, but the other isn't. And this is sometimes some of the insanity that I see when you start getting into legalism. And not to say, as Christians, we want to be concerned about keeping the focus, but we get so, it gets to be such a temptation to get so far off. Here's another one. Have you ever had anybody ever come up to tell you and ask you, do you celebrate Christmas? Yes. Now say, did you know that Christmas is not Jesus' birthday, and that December 25th is a pagan holiday? You ever had anybody say that to you?
Or don't celebrate my birth, celebrate my resurrection. And so anyways, we were talking kind of about it a little bit. But he said, and I said, I realized that they kind of say that God was probably, or Jesus was probably born in the summer. Not in December, but we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
But so what? You pick a date,
And then you say that, and then you get.
If he wasn't born, then how could we celebrate his resurrection if he didn't die?
Yep. And they're not saying that he wasn't born. They're saying where they get caught up in it. Usually this, because you'll tell them, okay, you know what? Yeah, we're celebrating his birth, and then they're going, well, did you know that Christmas is really a pagan holiday, and that you can't celebrate? They'll say, well, first, and here's the thing. They'll say nowhere in Christianity, I don't know of any Christian denomination at all that says December 25th is Jesus' birthday. We celebrate his birth, but no Christian church says we know. Some people say, well, then how did you come about December 25th? The Jehovah's Witnesses will say, well, December 25th was a European pagan holiday called Saturnalia, which celebrated the shortest day of the year, and people were worshiping nymphs and elves and whatever, all the things of nature. And so therefore, because that's what it is, you're sinning by celebrating Christmas on that day. And they'll go, you're practicing idolatry. Well, anybody with a head on their shoulders says, really, there's nothing about the Christian Christmas celebration. There's nothing that focuses on anything outside of the biblical. So where are you coming from on this? And then they'll say, well, Christians just decided to give in to the unbelievers with that. No, that's not how it happened. Okay? When the European Christians decided to celebrate, And you know what? For much of Christianity, Christians did not celebrate Christ's birth. When they decided to do it, and I think once again, and what a wonderful event that was, they decided there were a couple of factors that came into why they picked the date. If you ever look on a church on a religious calendar that keeps track of, where not only of the major church holidays, but also the minor ones where we remember different biblical figures and different events in the Bible. There's certain dates fixed for that. And you go back over 1,000 years ago, and there were some of these dates that were just kind of picked arbitrarily by different pastors and priests. One of them was they picked the date for. They thought they had a pretty good idea when the angel came to announce Jesus' birth to Mary, or that she was going to have him, and they kind of figured that out as when Jesus' conception took place. And so then what they did was they counted 9 months into the future and came up with December 25th. Okay, but nobody said this is that for sure. It was just something to kind of. And then European Christians thought that was a good idea. This is kind of where a lot of it started, because you had December 25th, that shortest day of the year, was a big day of celebration among the pagan people in the European countries. And so Christians looked at it this way. We have an opportunity. Everybody here is so focused and celebrating. Let's take this date for our celebration, and then it gives us an opportunity to explain to non-Christians why we're celebrating. And so it was actually an outreach. Share the gospel, share Jesus type of opportunity. That was the motivation behind it. Not that we're giving, because Jehovah's Witnesses will go in and they'll say, well, you got a Christmas tree in your house, you're worshiping an idol. Well, where did you get that strange idea? Well, I think it's in Nehemiah. God condemns some of Israel's neighbors for worshiping trees. Well, I don't think that's the same thing. I don't know of anybody that's worshiping their Christmas trees in their house. Actually, Christmas trees are actually a Lutheran tradition, started by Martin Luther himself, and it was a practice among European people back over, you go back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that they brought trees into their homes during the winter to decorate. It was just part of it. Luther decided to use that as an opportunity. He brought it into the church and encouraged people to bring it in, keep them in their homes, to teach biblical truths about Christmas.
Isn't that like this? The shape of the tree?
Well, you get the shape of the tree, evergreen for eternity. The light for Jesus is light of the world. Yep.
Oh my gosh.
The ornaments, actually the ornaments, one of the things that Luther encouraged was that they be Christian symbols, so that you can take that opportunity to teach the truths of the catechism. The Christmas tree is very Lutheran. And again, it was, here's, where Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists get so caught up, and a lot of times even too, Christians on the Reformed side of Christianity, they'll get into the, well, if it had something to do with a non-Christian practice, you can't even touch that. Again, what's the purpose? What's the focus? What am I trying to do with this? It's often where I've said, I don't get to be a stickler about this, but as I've learned more about it, because I got into a few years ago, really starting to study our Christmas traditions and why we do things the way and again, really started to see that Lutheran tradition with the Christmas tree and what it was all about. And I still don't get to be too much of a stickler about this, but I've said really when we have our our Christmas tree up in church, if we're going to be traditional, we should have religious ornaments as an opportunity, as an opportunity. But again, there's no law about that. It's just like with anything that we have with our tradition and the way that we do. It's good for us to know why we're doing it. Otherwise, it doesn't serve a good purpose. And maybe that's an approach that's good to take when if anybody decides I'm going to incorporate Santa into my Christmas celebration, we need to stop and ask, why am I doing it? Just like with anything else. It's always good to review and to refocus. No Christian parents are going to go to hell for incorporating Santa Claus into their Christmas celebration. No Christian's going to go to hell for incorporating a Christmas tree into their celebration. There are so many things that go along with our celebrations that whether it's families, fellowship, the giving of gifts, all of those things, it's a good reminder how these are wonderful things. How can they help me keep my focus on the purpose?
Because as kids, Christmas was not first. We still had the Santa, we never got to see him because that always met him on the road coming home. But Christmas still was.
Yep. And there's so many distractions today. And one of the things that gets me is, you hit October and you start seeing the Christmas decorations in the stores. But once again, with everything we do, always it's again evaluating why we're doing it, remembering that everything's permissible, not everything's beneficial. And in order to make it beneficial, it's always good to stop and refocus and reevaluate, why am I doing this? And it's good for us in the church to do this too with everything that we do. Always good to have a reminder why we're doing things the way we do. Because it can be so easy to just start getting into a mindless pattern.
Pastor, I think Wesley asked me, how come Christmas is December 25th, but what is it, how come Easter is different?
Oh, yes. Because Easter is celebrated on a different tradition, if you want to say, because Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection were so closely focused, it was tied and actually prophesied through the Jewish Passover, where Jesus died on the Passover. Actually, the day he was crucified was actually the day when Jews gathered to eat the Passover meal. Because it was so closely tied with that, Christians decided to keep, and seeing the biblical ties and prophecies with that follows a Jewish lunar calendar, which is different from the solar calendar that we follow. And so that is what determines, because where Easter always follows, forgive me for this, I can try to get this right, if Easter follows the first full moon after the spring solstice. And the Jews follow the lunar calendar, so that explains why it comes up at different times, where it can be 30 days apart. But it's because they follow the lunar calendar. And the Passover is what we see Jesus, his death and resurrection, is the fulfillment of the Passover.
I told her, I said it has something to do with kind of the church year, kind of the whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
because that one was so closely related to the Jewish calendar, and they try to keep it. Okay, this is when Passover is celebrated. This is when we're going to celebrate Easter. And so then they come back to when to start Ash Wednesday. Anyway. anyway, I'm gonna go up and get,